All right. Hi, and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Danielle Ori. I'm the Director of Career Services here at Computer Coach, and I'd like to just provide a quick overview of Computer Coach. We're a tech training school headquartered in Tampa Bay, Florida, and we excel in the world of IT and business careers, and we support our students and customers to be able to do so as well. We're dedicated to empowering individuals and organizations through comprehensive IT training courses in key focus areas: coding, cybersecurity, infrastructure, and data, but also those tech adjacent areas such as project management and business analysis. By choosing Computer Coach, you're not just gaining knowledge, you're joining a community of passionate learners and industry experts who are committed to your success. Whether you're an aspiring IT professional, a career changer, or looking to upskill and enhance your current career, Computer Coach is here to support your journey. So we're really excited to welcome our guest speaker this morning, Seth Earby. Today's webinar is brought to you by the Career Services Department, and through that department, students gain access to invaluable resources such as these. And if you have any questions or would like additional details, don't hesitate to reach out to us. I'll make sure I put my information in the chat. Our senior career strategist, Cassandra Perez, is also on the call, and you can reach out to her as well. I'm sure she'll drop her information in the chat. So without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to Seth.
Thanks, Danielle. Hard to beat that intro. Today, we're going to be talking about the title of this is Cloudy with a Chance of Pitfalls. And really what we're going to discuss is going to be a little bit all over the map. We're going to talk about, some of cloud security, kind of the rise of cloud technology, the security that kind of followed through it, and kind of where we're at today. I wouldn't be a security professional without putting a disclaimer with regarding statements. And so, the opinions in this presentation are my own, don't represent any endorsements from an employer or business. So intro about myself. I'm in the IT cybersecurity field for about 13 years now. I'm a certified information security manager, and I've kind of worked in a variety of fields, as IT cybersecurity consultant, director of GRC, where I'm at now. And I've been probably yelling at cloud technology for close to 10 plus years. I finally got started into the cloud technology field in 2013. Interesting anecdote for that. I was working with a small law firm, and they had an email crash. And one of the things we were doing is their email server just went completely down. There was no hope in resurrecting it. And we were just trying to, scramble and think of what opportunities, we had to just get up as fast as possible. Well, in 2013, Office 365 got started, or really, kind of made a public appearance. And so that was my first transition from a legacy Exchange email system and moved them over to the cloud entirely. It actually worked rather amazing, considering this was just in our infancy in our first project. And that really kind of got me started into saying, okay, now that we're kind of coming into this and, this is what this has the ability to do. First, an SMB law firm, what other opportunities exist for this? So, to kind of get started in this, want to go over some, quick key terms. A lot of times when we talk about cloud, technology, it obviously gets, amorphous and, nondescript. And one of the things when we talk about cloud technology, and as I'll kind of allude to here, really it kind of divides in two terms. There's much more than that, but really we're going to be speaking, in these two vectors. So infrastructure as a service, that's going to be kind of the big names, the Google Cloud, Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure. That's going to be kind of the traditional data center environments where people are spinning up servers and networking systems, in the cloud, from a previous hosting provider. Software as a service, it's kind of set as SaaS. These are going to be the formal web applications that we're used to: Zoom, Slack, Office 365, where a vendor is maintaining a product and we buy a subscription or an account with that. So I think the reason why we have to go a little bit over history, and I think the history is important for cloud technology because I think, a lot of us maybe have some exposure. Some of us here maybe, understand what business was like before the cloud. Maybe some of us only have business experience working, with cloud systems. And I think it's important to come to that context because I think it really changed the landscape of the cloud environment. So in 2006, Amazon Web Services opens up. And, really the way that came into play was Amazon is not nearly the giant that we know it is today, but it was getting, a rather large traction. And they needed to come up with a system that allowed them to have an online resale store that, was available, was consistent, was a great experience for all their customers. And one of the ways they had to do that is that they had to spend a significant investment in their server infrastructure in order to keep that system running. Well, they kind of overspec that and they said, okay, well, why don't we sell this to other customers that maybe need the same thing? Fast forward 4 years ago, probably a lot of us around 2010 were familiar with Netflix. A lot of us probably had subscriptions to that. I was probably around that same time where we bought a Netflix subscription and, we were looking at, the streaming services. And, what's really important about, I think, Netflix making that partnership in 2010 is Netflix has got a huge demand. I mean, it was, talking about two culture shifts at one, coming from traditional on-premise blockbuster video rentals to they're just now streaming this over the internet. And so a lot of people say, okay, well, Netflix can run gigabytes of content over an Amazon Web Services. Maybe my app will do as well. Again, kind of going back to my anecdote in 2013, Microsoft Office kind of comes into play where they're, offering email as a service. I think this is important because, this is kind of the birth of that SaaS model where, companies could just sign up for a subscription and get a very robust, reliable service, rather quickly compared to what was previously done. And then as that system matures, kind of see this in like 4 years span, Gartner and a couple other, major technology thought leadership companies, start talking about cloud computing as this really has some traction. This is going to be the future of technology. And again, kind of talking about this, I think the history is important because with rapid growth, there really comes issues at scale. I think when, Gartner and some of the market trendsetters were saying, how big is the cloud going to grow? They were expecting somewhere between $32 to $32.5 billion in 2016. Well, by the time 2016 rolls around, the estimated Gartner market was 37.7 billion. So, the market greatly exceeded the expectations of what this was going to happen. In today's time, what we're seeing is that number is expected to be 243 billion. So we're talking about a massive growth within a rather short period of time for technology and how many businesses are relying on cloud technology. I think what's funny when we talk about IT, because, I started kind of my IT career in kind of that very peak transition window when we were still deploying Exchange servers. We were still deploying a lot of on-premise business apps. We were spinning up servers just so, people could connect to QuickBooks and things. We didn't have the proliferation of cloud technology like we do now. And I think it changed our landscape to where, we could buy stuff. You could swipe a credit card and get people access to QuickBooks. You could swipe a credit card and get people access to business email. And it just changed so much for so many people. Having that ease of use and low upfront costs, you weren't having to buy a $10, $15, $20,000 server, wait a few weeks to get it up and running was a game changer for so many people. Again, like when you're working with businesses that maybe have distributed models, maybe you have a company in Chicago opening an office in Fort Lauderdale. They have to come up with all these challenges between how are they going to be able to have a reliable system for their employees and their customers. Cloud technology really kind of turned that on its head. And I think, today we have a completely different change of pace with COVID. A lot of us working from home. This is not a real office. I work from home as well. So the ability that all of us have these abilities to access our work and be productive in a system that is, no matter where we're at, whether we're in an airplane, at home, or in the office, a system that accommodates and accounts for that is a huge win for traditional IT. And I think the other thing, though, it's that kind of amorphous sound, like, nobody really knows what the cloud is. You can kind of say, oh, it's in the cloud. And, nobody really has to know what that means. There's no kind of a veil of mystery to it. I think that's rather, it seems a little simple. It has changed a lot of companies to want to sound more, cutting edge versus, oh, yeah, we just have a server in the back of somebody's closet. I think the point with this is for IT, one of the major drawbacks of working with traditional IT infrastructure is just the lag time it takes to get things operational. I've used it, myself, and I talk with other industry leaders, and we talk about that as kind of being the word friction, right? How much work does it take to move this into a usable state? And I think cloud technology is like trying to take server infrastructure and move it on ice. We talk about now, with some of the modern cloud environments, you can click buttons, you can write code, you can do all these things to just get infrastructure set up. And that changes so much for so many, businesses, whether you're a Fortune 25 or, you're a small mom and pop shop. I think that makes a huge difference from what IT is able to do. And I think the rewards of that system has contributed a lot to the rapid growth of the cloud technology. And again, talking about the distributed model of what we have as an expectation within the world today. Like I said, Netflix is streaming content left and right. Amazon, we can get to it on our mobile phones. We can get to it from the web. We can get to it from these different applications. And just that a need for availability due to customer and business demands just skyrocketed. And I think that makes a big difference. Our reliability on the availability of systems has maintained us to maybe over invest in that type of terminology. One of the things I was doing recently, some of us that come from the cybersecurity field, there's a triad, and we'll go over it in the next slide. We have some tenets that are foundational to cybersecurity: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. But over the time that we were building IT solutions, I was trying to think of what did we do when we were building, when someone came to us, some business leader said, hey, I have 125 people on my sales team. We need to have access to this CRM system, and I need my California teams and my Florida teams to have access to the same systems, and it to be fast and it to be available and to be efficient. And I think that was something that we all kind of spoke to at the time. And so I wanted to come up with a bit of an idea to kind of attune to how IT was used to developing solutions versus how cybersecurity is. And so I think largely this existed on, the kind of the same three tenets: familiarity, availability, and efficiency. I think with IT, we were always trying to build systems that we knew we could support. We wanted to understand what systems we were working with. Does this read the same? Does it speak the same language we're used to? And then, obviously the king of the castle here is that availability. Are we able to build something that is robust and resilient to our customers? And then efficiency, does this work fast? Is it cost effective? Do we get tangible benefits out of it? Kind of like painting a room or something. It's almost an instant gratification versus I got to buy a server and then I got to wait 2 weeks for it to get here. And then, oh, wait, they didn't give me this part, so now I have to send it back, right? The efficiency model of IT is a real, driving factor in a variety of different ways. Oftentimes, working within enterprise IT and security teams, we kind of seem like like a division robbery almost. The IT team wants to move things fast and get this spinning, and some VP is knocking on their door every day to get this up and going, and security is like, wait, we got to do our process, we got to do this risk assessment, we have to make sure the vulnerabilities are clean, and all these things of that nature. And there also seems to be kind of like a pitted nature, and I think largely, you can kind of see here that, availability is still applied for each form. As a, cybersecurity, you put the cybersecurity hat on as, I want the system to be available. I can't go in there and just because it's more secure, take away from the user experience and say, okay, well, if you want to have access to the system, you got to go into this room, you got to wear this green shirt, and you got to tie your shoes this certain way before you can access the system. That's just not a great user experience. And so, each one of these has requirement to align everything in their own domain. So I do think that they have domain expertise and viability in their own standings, but we have to figure out a way to align it. And I think with what's happened to where we're at today, like I said, so many business and customer demands are centered around availability. How can we keep users access to the system? How can we create reliable connections for our customers? How can we improve our SLAs? How do we win more contracts? And a lot of that centers around availability. I think a lot of it has to do with the tangible benefits that infrastructure creates when it's highly available, right? If I tell you that I'm going to build this system in the East Coast and then I'm going to build a system in the West Coast, you can see those servers. You can see if that system gets shut down, the people in the West Coast or the East Coast can kind of cross connect. There is a tangible benefit into making an investment into availability versus confidentiality or efficiency or integrity. And I think that's almost skewed the metrics in the availability favor at the sacrifice of some others. So I think this has kind of created a culture shock for a lot of us in cybersecurity. I mean, enterprise organizations have often relied on some of that slow moving processes of IT in the past to introduce security functions. I remember working on IT teams, kind of out of that transition period of kind of going back into security, that we would wait till the server team, got the server built and they got it updated, and then they got the model deployed, the software deployed in beta, and then we would review the beta stage, and then they would promote it to production. And this whole thing took 60 plus days for us to do this process, but by the time we gave it the stamp of approval, it was all good to go. Now, like I said, that cloud technology is moving things on ice. They can create this stuff at breakneck speeds compared to what we can do on the traditional IT front, and then also what we can do from a security perspective. Kind of modern cloud teams, for us maybe familiar with that, is we see some of these enterprise cloud teams that have engineers that are tailed DevOps. These are people that can write code that builds these, massive technology environments, really within seconds, and that's a huge win for those in the IT field. But, a lot of us in security that are required, that are used to using those slow moving processes to be able to introduce our security functions, we can kind of become outgunned. And I think that's kind of created a way for us to be in the middle. We're kind of in a pit between what are the capabilities and functions of cybersecurity, and then what are the capabilities of IT. Like I mentioned, using things as infrastructure as code, these cloud infrastructure teams can build 35 servers in a day, rather I can maybe only spend time to evaluate one or two. And I think that's created an unfair advantage, and today, we talk about this a lot. We see a lot of the diatribe about how so many modern cybersecurity teams are understaffed, or there's not enough positions for people in cybersecurity. But where does that actually lead us? And there was a study done by ISACA late last year where they said that, speaking to cybersecurity leaders, almost 60% of them actually reported that they were understaffed compared to their demands. And so again, we're talking about when the cybersecurity leaders are not able to meet certain objectives because of their own strategic roadmap, and then the infrastructure teams are able to spin things up so much faster than we can secure them, we kind of catch ourselves in this kind of no man's land. And then, when we're not synchronized for these efforts, we create backlogs for both sides. The IT team, when they build 35 servers in a week, the security team does 5, we've got a 6 interval backlog. Kind of the same way within security teams. If we go in there and we investigate the IT infrastructure and we realize, okay, we need to change this port, or we need to update the software vulnerability, we have to rely on IT. So you can't just say, okay, well, I'm going to solve this and go 4 to 1. For every 4 people in IT, I'm going to devote 1, or devote 1 person in security for 4 IT. We have to have some sort of synchronized effort, because otherwise we're creating backlogs and we're not able to move IT and security at the same pace. And I think as we kind of advance in the future, assessing, what happened, why did we get the way that we do? And I think a lot of this ends up coming from the pandemic, quite honestly, where in 2020, a lot of us are still or did at one point have to go into an office and log into a system. And then you had all your files on the file server and you had all your applications installed on your desktop. And then the March of 2020, we all had to send everyone home, and we had to figure out a strategy to say, okay, wait, we still need to get business done. We still owe a duty to our customers. How do we get these systems in an area that they can access them as fast as possible? And so we kind of changed our deployment model, or we changed to a model that maybe doesn't fit the size that we need. We were taking what we call in the industry a lift and shift, taking exactly what we have in our on-premise data center in our office, and we're moving it to AWS or Azure, and then we're just going to gateway controls for people to use it that way. Well, we were coming from a model that was designed with an assumption that if you have access to the system, you're physically in the office, you have an account, you're expected to be able to use the system. Well, when we throw it into the cloud, we're taking it out of the protection of our brick and mortar, and we're potentially exposing that to people outside of the organization. So for those not familiar with technology like that, we're basically creating systems that were designed not to use that. I think a good example of that is, just how big we've got with vehicles and cars today. We were used to driving these small commuter type cars and things. Now that the gas prices and EVs have come down and really made it more of an opportunity for us to be able to get larger vehicles to accommodate all the things we have. Kind of run into these examples where we have things that just don't fit what used to be in the past. And I think that's how a lot of how IT infrastructure was. We were creating systems that were designed with some security in mind and some assumptions about who would be accessing it and why they would be accessing it. Now that we've kind of thrown it to the wind of cloud technology and exposed that to many, many people, both in the organization and outside of the organization, we're kind of having to change our models, and I think within the pandemic, a lot of these organizations had to go much, much higher than they expected. And like I said on the previous slides, with our non-tandem approach to IT and security, when we make all these investments into IT, we often kind of push security under the rug a little bit or push them back a little bit because they're not able to meet the demands of what our IT needs are. I think where this comes into the thesis of this whole thing is the pitfalls of cloud environments. How bad can it be? How bad can having a robust IT team and deployment strategy, what consequences become of that? And I think it could be a lot worse, but it's not great. One of the things that I've got this from is the Verizon Data Breach Investigation Report. That's a really great read for those in the org and maybe some of us maybe more adjacent that would just like to have some color around what we hear in the news. I think the main thing, with this one was a screenshot of 450 breaches that were reported. Here is the breakdown of around 20% were due to misconfiguration. Taking that's maybe not as high as a number, but what I thought was really interesting is when they said that misconfiguration error happened, these were from people that we trust. It's your own team, the developer and the system admin are making simple mistakes because maybe they're pressured or they don't have the right tooling or under-resourced and all these things that where they were making just negligent errors that ultimately ended up in the consequences of a data breach or some sort of security event. One of the things that, again, for those that are familiar with it, maybe we've heard of the OWASP organization, which is a web app security org. And one of the things that they do every year is they do a top 10 analysis on security threats for web application. Right now, misconfiguration sits around 8 out of 10 of the top 10 observed security vulnerabilities. Here in the past, it's gone from 4 and 5. So we are making strides into reducing our threats of misconfiguration, but it is something that is still having, tangible effects on the impact of our security for our environments. I think when we talk about that, understanding these misconfigurations and just kind of the day-to-day flow of what security governance is like, it's really tools, people, and processes, making sure you have things in place that whenever something goes through and outside of normal change control, right? Change control is definitely a factor. But, I think there needs to be a process to making sure that if we make a requirement for IT to deliver something, we should make a requirement for security to secure it. Using platforms to accommodate these things, one thing that I have some experience with and absolutely love is Wiz. It's a tool that is able to sit into the cloud and analyze Amazon Web Services and Microsoft Azure environments and find vulnerabilities, find misconfigurations. You create compliance frameworks and say, okay, I only want these ports exposed on my web server. And, maybe a developer made a change to do some logging or to do some console analysis, and they exposed something that wasn't there in beta and wasn't there in UAT, but when they put it in production, they made that change. This having some sort of automated system that is scalable to the tune of what IT can deliver really helps us as security professionals. Obviously, again, talking about the processes is creating standards and templates to ensure our baselines are covered. I think that's something that is not as illustrious as building some new tool or building some security as code type framework, but really making sure that we're just doing simple governance, techniques to making sure that the system is aligned to what we want to promote as an organization is a major piece to it. Going into it, one of the main things, kind of like I said, in certain areas, a high availability sometimes come with a high accessibility. So while we're building servers in California and Chicago and New York, so we can make sure our clients have consistent access to wherever they are, a lot of times in those misconfigurations, if we're not doing templates and standards and baseline configurations, we can often bring more risk in different avenues. So yes, while our customers may be able to access it, or our employees may be able to access it reliably, so can attackers. So what we need to do is making sure that we're spending the time, whether it's a SaaS application or publicly exposed infrastructure, that we're doing the right methods to secure the access permissions for them. And that's typically associated with identity systems. I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with stolen credentials in the forms of phishing or normal brute forcing, abusing passwords. And what I think is, as the Verizon Data Breach Investigation Report shows, a lot of these attacks are coming from use of stolen credentials. And then when they get someone's stolen credentials, they're often being able to use a user's assigned access to deploy something that they shouldn't, right? So they're not doing an NCIS level, hacking attempt to exploit a firewall. They're taking an IT administrator's password, or they're taking maybe a controller or a VP's elevated access permissions, and they're using that to get access to systems that they normally wouldn't have and use that to compromise. So really, I think, the opportunities that we have there is to limit these multiple passwords and reduce password fatigue. So we're not putting that onus of responsibility on our users to say, okay, these are the 16 systems that you absolutely control and belong to, go secure them. I often get pushback from that, right? When I start saying, oh, we need to enable single sign-on and we need to really centralize our identity access management systems, a lot of people head scratch and say using a single username and password increases our security. I think the answer is yes. One of the things that I think is interesting as we kind of poised here is I think security often comes at a disadvantage for not being able to move quickly, right? If we have a password that is compromised, or we have a user that is compromised and say they're using that same username and password across all systems. If we have a VP of finance or a controller that has access to 7, 8, a dozen systems, and each of them have their own separate username and password, and we know that there's a compromise in that account, think about it like what we have on the screen here. Imagine there's a document in this briefcase. We have to open up each briefcase and go in there and change that document, seal them all back up and shut before the user can get back up and going again. I think if we were to centralize that to like a single source of truth and we say, okay, this is the username and password we're going to use across the organization, and we're going to add multi-factor authentication, and we're going to make sure the user's onboarded and terminated at the right times. Being able to centralize that and move that quickly is paying much more dividends today. I think when we come into cloud strategy, well, a lot of times we're talking about user identity, right? Sure, a lot of us have some sort of a multi-factor authentication where we're doing it for our work, we're doing it for our banks. We have this type of expectation that multi-factor authentication is a security control, and it is. I do believe that it's a necessity, but I think for where we are on the adoption of cloud strategies, and again, it's probably to no one's surprise that attackers mature as society matures, and the things that we could get away with years ago doesn't necessarily equate to what we can get away with today. A lot of us were using our name 1234 or password 1, and we just know that's just not going to cut it nowadays, and much less we have restrictions to prevent that type of stuff. And so what this demo is showing here is how an attacker can proxy or relay to account. So an attacker is enticing a user to click a fake link, so they're going to a fake Google website. They enter their username and password like they normally would, and then wait, an MFA prompt comes. So what they're able to do is they're able to take that MFA prompt, present real information to the end user, and then once you authenticate, they're able to capture that response and play it back on their side. You could think about this if we were to do like a conference call or a three-way call, and I had the bank call you and say, hey, we need to do a validation on your account, and you authenticate, and then as soon as you do what I need you to do, I drop you off and run forward. These are some of the modern attacks that these attackers are able to do. And so again, we're talking about security landscapes that are going past just basic hygiene. And so, how do we protect ourselves going forward? I think it's the layered approach. We talk about zero trust, we talk about security layers, we talk about ring fencing and things like that. And really all we're trying to evangelize in security is one or two methods is not good enough anymore. As fast as we can move in IT infrastructure, these attackers have the same access to the same systems. So they can run attacks from the cloud. They can run distributed attack models. They can do brute forcing from these botnets where there's hundreds of thousands of computers at times. And so, really creating these layered type approaches is how we're going to win in our security functions. Having these multiple protection layers not only adds a level of sophistication, but also adds a layer of protection and an additional control. I think with what we have today as a way to spin off zero trust and layered security, I have an example here, but there's so many different strategies and cost structures that can really help tailor solutions to any organization. Maybe there's some things in here where username and multi-factor authentication is achievable at an SMB market, but when we talk about user behavior and analytics, and I'll talk about that later on in another slide, maybe that type of solution is not scalable. So I think we have enough opportunities to create different models, different layers, and making sure that we have an approach to this. When we get into these cloud environments, like I said, they're kind of ambiguous and amorphous, right? When I say it's, hey, what about your data files, or what's your most important asset? You say, oh, it's in the cloud. I'm like, well, is that Word documents? Is that an infrastructure? Is that a database? There's just so many things when we talk about the cloud that it can be amorphous and ambiguous. And I think this requires so many key people into these environments that just far exceed what we're used to in the past. When we were talking about traditional IT deployment models, if we were working with developers, we would build the server infrastructure that they need. We were working with database people. We were building the database systems they need. If accounting needed an ERP system, we were deploying that for them. And IT kind of owned everything in the middle. We were kind of proxying everything through us. Nowadays, with the cloud environments, we spin off a cloud ERP system and we tell finance, like, hey, here's your system, you go control it. Hey, IT, we need all this data in the cloud. You go control that. And we're bringing all these cooks into the kitchen, but we're not really managing the resources appropriately. I think a great example of this, and just goes to show you, like, this isn't a small guy problem at all. Earlier this year, Microsoft announced an attack where they had a legacy environment for testing. This wasn't even meant to be a production network, but because of how they had that configured, an attacker was able to compromise that tenant and use the access that they had for certain executives at Microsoft. They were able to move laterally and get into that production environment because there were some different layers of trust. Again, who knows exactly who's going to own that fault there? But I think that just goes to show you, how much having all these key players and decision makers into a system like this without dedicated responsibility can really come up with us stepping on each other's toes. Talking about IT and security, a lot of cloud environments have governed IT security function, right? IT is going to create the resources and they're going to do the audits and they're going to make sure that people have access to what we need. And then security is going to do their function where they're making sure things operate. But we're talking about a lot of times that the IT team may have 16 people on staff and the security team has 5. And so we have this ability to where these changes aren't synchronized. And talking about with what we need from IT sometimes, the security professionals, we need to have software updated. We need to have systems patched due to vulnerability found in with a legacy application. We require IT efforts to be able to do that. And so we've reached this weird kind of division rivalry again, where security team has certain functions that they need and IT team has access to certain functions they need. And, those times aren't often assigned. And inevitably what happens is IT says, okay, well, this doesn't need security because it's a test system, right? Like what we saw with Microsoft, and create this shadows where the security team isn't plugged into what infrastructure exists out there. And there's nobody to just kind of stand overwatch and say, okay, this system is legacy. This system's 5 years old. This system hasn't been powered on in 4 years. Do we still need it around anymore? So it's kind of like, what do we do with these problems, right? We're creating security issues just due to mismanagement of people and resources. I think a lot of that is one of the things, maybe some of us have familiar with is the kitchen nightmares, right? Gordon Ramsay comes into a restaurant where they maybe have the right people in the places and the location and everything, but because they're just so grossly mismanaging their environment, it's really causing them to suffer. I think a lot of that happens, again, we're talking about in culinary, and we have line cooks and executive chefs and sous chefs, and we have dedicated responsibilities, even though everybody's tuned to do the same thing. I think we have to be able to arrange IT and security in concert with each other, saying, okay, IT manager, you're responsible for making sure blah, 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 blah. Security team, you're responsible for blah, blah, blah. Being able to create some sort of deputy sous chef, some sort of quasi ownership and tools of these processes can really help empower our teams to be informed of what is going on. And then being also having subject matter experts, because a lot of times we talk about data in the cloud. Well, as an IT or security professional, I don't know what data is sensitive to the finance team. And so I have to rely on a finance sous chef to tell me, hey, this is what we need. This is who needs access to this. This is who nobody should have access to, and be able to create some sort of assigned responsibility. Then I think we can take that a step further. I think when we create IT security leaders or some form of executive management can create a forum where we can discuss this. I think I'm a huge advocate of governance committees where we have subject matter experts in IT infrastructure and subject matter experts in cloud security and just whomever needs to be involved in this, and giving these people a forum to be able to meet at a regular basis and discuss these projects and discuss, how these issues are going to be raised. I think a lot of times we talk about shadow IT and, we talk about things in the security industry. And I think it's a major drawback where we talk about all these functions that if somebody simply knew about them, they could easily be resolved. And so creating some sort of governance committee and some forum where people can meet and discuss and talk about, some things that they're aware of their own domain expertise and be able to say, hey, I noticed this issue, but IT team, I need your help to get it done. Creating some sort of synergy between those two teams and giving them a place to do that versus commanding orders or going through some legacy processes really helps. And again, using tools, audit, and vendors to help establish those baselines. I know a lot of people that I've spoken to over the years when we talk about cloud security is, oh, we're not ready for that. We're not ready for an audit. We're not ready for compliance. We just have too much stuff to do. And there's absolutely some merit to that. But I think at times you need to use tools and audits and vendors to help you get to a spot where you can establish a baseline. Then once we have those baselines established, then we can start bringing those key decision makers into the floor and say, okay, now that we have this figured out, or now that we've discussed the strategy, how do we want to move going forward? So kind of wrapping up here at the end, we're talking about just cloud security and some of the bad and the good. I think that obviously some of the bad stuff is just the growth and proliferation. I think we've greatly improved some of our experiences with cloud, both for our customers and our employees. But kind of the downside of that is that we haven't been able to take the time and do our gateways and our segmentations to understand, are we adequately introducing security in the right places? I think for the IT teams being able to quickly deploy this, security is now trying to catch up with this. We'll talk about this a little bit more with AI and machine learning tools, where we're finally getting to a point where some of the players in the cloud security space are able to use this AI and machine learning to understand from a security perspective of what's tolerable. As we're building this availability across our environments, when we're taking a server and we're duplicating it across 3 or 4 regions of the United States, if we have a misconfiguration and we duplicate it 4 times, we amplify that. And I think a lot of that has to do just with, by the nature of the cloud environment, not having those baselines in place, making sure we're introducing the right processes. We're talking about maybe from a SaaS perspective is having these unregulated user access, having 7, 8, 9 passwords. I'm sure all of us have that as well, where we have 5 or 6 logins we have to maintain from the system. And do we want to put that on our end users, as security leaders and risk managers? And do we really feel like understanding the drawbacks of what a weak username and password, especially for those that have privileged information, do we really feel like nowadays understanding what can be done, does putting that onus on our employees and our users to maintain security, is that really the method going forward? And now understanding how complex these phishing attacks can be, I think it's really putting some more onus back on us to understand, okay, what can we do to make things easier for our employees and customers? And then obviously, like I said in the beginning, the governance and accountability is not being able to meet the demands head on and say, okay, wait a minute, we can't build anything, we can't grow, we can't scale until we figure this out. That just was not a way for us to move forward. I think there's a lot of good. We are catching up society and through just the different cultures, and people are starting to, there's a reason we're talking about this today, right? Like there's a lot of headwind and oxygen in the room for people talking about cloud security, because we've started to realize as a culture that we've made significant investments to this type of technology. We have to understand how we're going to secure it. I think today we have some of us, maybe even on this call, where we have some cloud security engineers, we have cloud security architects. We're devoting SMEs to a subject where we need to make very considered investments into this, especially if there's maybe some people trying to start a cybersecurity career and we're coming to this to know, cloud security is a great investment. It's a great field. It's growing left and right. And so being able to have, recruiting people to understand this stuff as a full-time job is really, I think, going to rapidly mature some of those organizations. And again, just the awareness that we have today is far more in tune. I think we have a lot more people that are aware of some of the downfalls. I can imagine recommending to someone to, just use the same username and password for all your accounts and let it rip, right? We hear breaches left and right each and every day, and we all kind of know that that's just not going to suffice anymore. We're developing more frameworks and abilities to oversee and kind of contain these threats, things like Zero Trust and Cloud Security Alliance and CIS, and a lot of these different frameworks that allow us to introduce controls in a tested manner to understand, like, what are we bringing to the table as far as security. I mentioned with AI and machine learning, I think there is a future there that we have to understand, but I think these tools are really going to help us. I think this AI and machine learning is going to do a lot of work for us in IT security. I don't think it's going to replace any jobs. I think it's going to compound jobs. I think a lot of times whenever I've done these things to where we have to make these problems visible, someone's like, hey, go investigate how many vulnerabilities we have. If I fire up a tool like Wiz and say, yeah, I did it, we have 688 vulnerabilities in our cloud environments, everybody spits out their coffee. There's no way that any of us in the governance function could be able to adequately ascertain that environment without these types of tools. Talking about the future in AI, again, these are most of my predictions, so you get what you pay for here. I draw a lot of this to how we were talking about cloud security years ago. We talk about what cloud security was, cloud environments in 2017. We're talking about the same people, right? Google, Amazon, and Microsoft. Who's going to build the biggest, baddest cloud environment? Now we're kind of coming into that with AI. We have some smaller players like OpenAI and some third-party libraries I kind of remember at the times where, we were discussing cloud environments and we had so many kind of like mid-market companies saying, okay, we're just going to build our own cloud. We're not going to pay Amazon and Google any money. We're just going to buy 2 co-location data centers and build our own environment. And then to the tune of $5.5 million later, over the next couple of years, they realized that maybe they got it wrong and maybe that Amazon, Azure, and Google have a lot more strategic investments they can make into these platforms. And so, I kind of think of what we happen with AI to where like, oh, I'm going to spin off, our organization is going to invest in our own AI technology. And, tuning OpenAI's ChatGPT model costs $2 to $3 million in several months. A lot of them don't have, a lot of these organizations thinking that really don't have that type of capital to invest in a kind of a fringe environment. So I kind of think now as technology leaders and understanding, what cloud technology has really brought to us, I'm hoping that we kind of have a leash long enough to understand what innovation and what room that we have to do this, but understand that there's going to be key decision makers and key players in this space, and that we can leverage the investments they put in that technology to serve our org. I think another thing too, if you're not familiar with it, is, this is even made up to the federal level. The United States of America has created AI.gov as kind of a governance channel where they spread a lot of the information about their opportunities to secure AI. I mean, I think a lot of us know, maybe we played with ChatGPT and can really see what's going on with it, and we can tell, what's going on or what's likely to come in the future. And I think with what we have now, being able to introduce the governance for a new technology, right? That's not something we've really seen in the future. I feel pretty confident that we're going to get more right with AI than we maybe did with cloud security in that same kind of adoption window. So kind of wrapping that up, I think that the major takeaways that I really just wanted to stress is just strategy and strategy and strategy, right? There's no panacea when it comes to cloud security. Oh, enable MFA, enable this tool, buy this, use a SOC. There's just not like a single one size fits all solution. I think it really comes into adopting a cloud strategy is going to having key decision makers and key influencers into, that have considerable investments into the cloud model for the organization, coming to a table and discussing how do we want to do this. I think kind of early on where we're talking about with AI, we're looking at this change adoption curve. We're kind of looking into that visionaries now. We're kind of reaching a state where these organizations are figuring out, okay, how can we utilize this today to get some tangible benefit out of it? And I think whether we talk about with cloud, we're in that laggard stage. And, I think many organizations that haven't truly embraced the cloud technology are just skeptical. Maybe they're doing a disservice to their organization by being too skeptical into a solution that's worked for billion-dollar organizations, at scales that most of us can't imagine. And I think what happens is a lot of the times that I've heard this throughout my career of, wait till it's figured out, right? I'm not going to get this. I'm not going to invest into this product. I'm going to wait for Microsoft to figure it out for me. I'm going to wait for Azure to figure it out for me, or Amazon. And what happens with that stage is you don't get to learn with the solution, right? I think as we're in that chasm, we can ride the wave of the change adoption and we can start predicting where things are going to go. And I think that's the big piece here is getting into an environment, coming up with a strategy and then learning through it, figuring out, taking each step of cloud security and saying, okay, what investments do we need to make into this? Because there is not going to be one size fits all solution. We are going to have to bite this off in little layers and figuring out, okay, at each stage, what are we going to properly introduce to make the solution work for us? And that is going to be all that I have. And so I want to kind of open up the floor for any questions and comments. For those, I don't know if I covered this in the beginning, but if there's any slides you want me to bring up, just let me know. I had some
Coach.com.